afternoon. My sincere gratitude uh, to Paturiji, Manishji, and others from Indica for providing me this opportunity to share my thoughts on a text which is not exactly known uh, even inside Assam, even inside the cultural geography of Assam. So I'm thankful that I'm getting an opportunity to talk about Rudra Singha's Siva Purana. It's the title of my paper is Localizing the Saiva Cult in Assamese, Rudra Singha's Siva Purana. So I will not be talking. I'll be not. I won't be actually mapping a history of Shaivism in Assam, because that would take obviously a longer time to negotiate. But I'll be primarily talking about this specific Purana, this Bhasha Purana that appeared, that got composed sometime between 1696 and 1714. So before beginning a discussion on the text, I would just like to spend a few slides, take a few slides to talk about very basic things, very fundamental things about how Shaivism developed in the preceding period. I mean, before Rudra Singha, I'll talk about Rudra Singha in due course of time. Now, if we talk about the tradition of Shiva, just give me a moment. This is just. If we talk about the tradition of Shiva worship in Assam, and I'm here using the term, first slide please, Assam Kamarupa, because Assam, as we see now, were actually three kingdoms during the medieval period. There was this Assam, Kamrup, which subsequently became Coach Bihar. So therefore, I'm using Assam Kamrup as a compound term. Assam here refers to the kingdom which came under the Ahom rulers. I'll come to a map subsequently. So this tradition actually goes back to the 7th century, to the time of the Varman kings. So there are three prominent dynasties of Kamrupa kings: the Varman, the Shalastambhas, and the Palas. And here I'm talking about the king called Bhaskar Burman, who is described in Banabhatta's 7th century work, Harsa Charita, as an ardent devotee of Shiva. In the 7th chapter of this work, there's a reference to this king, and where it is stated that I'm referring from the English translation, that from childhood upwards, it was this prince's firm resolution never to do homage to any being except the lotus feet of Shiva. Now, as is the case with most Eastern languages of India, including Assamese, obviously we all know about how Charjapadas became the common, instance of a written literature for Assamese, Bengali, and also Oriya and also Maithili, composed between the 9th and the 12th centuries. Now, for that period, from the 5th till about the 13th, it's only in the 13th century that the Ahoms actually come from South China, from Yunnan. So till the 13th century, textual evidence in the vernacular is somewhat scarce. So for that period, the major source of political and literary cultural documentation, we have the copperplate inscriptions, we have the stone inscriptions, and the sectarian religious texts composed in Sanskrit, and the oral traditions. So, in one of these early copperplate inscriptions, known as the Nidhanpur copperplates of Bhaskar Burman, and this was issued sometime between AD 620 and AD 643. Incidentally, when Yuan Song had visited Kamarupa, he had met this king, Bhaskar Burman. The opening plate contains an invocation to Shiva, which is as follows. Please pardon my Sanskrit. Om pranamya devam sashishekharam priyam pinakinam bhasmaka nair vibhushitam. It is translated as salutations to the god who wears the moon as the crest jewel, who is lovely and who holds the pinaka bow, and who is decorated with particles of ashes. So the devotion of Shiva in Assam, as it is evident, is closely aligned with Shaktaism, and this was amply evident in the recently concluded seminar that happened in Cotton University. You know, when you're talking about the feminine principle, the mother, specifically the mother goddess cult. Bannikanta Kakoti has a very important book on this, the mother goddess cult, and by extension with Tantricism. So Shaivism, then as a devotional order, existed in the region, however, prior to the propagation of the Shakti cult, as attested by the Kalika Purana. Now, this is a Sanskrit Purana which was, it's assumed it was composed in Kamarupa around the 10th, 11th century. Now, in the 30th chapter of Kalika Purana, the religious culture of the inhabitants of Kamrup are described, and it talks about a mythical past when Naraka, who was the mythical founder of the Burman dynasty, he was given the responsibility by Vishnu to assume kingship of this region. So it's a reference from Kalika Puran. It says that Nimajjakshan matrena Pragjyotish Purangatah Madhyagang Kamrupasya Kamakhya Jatra Naika Sacha Desha Swarajarte Purbang Guptasya Shambhuna. The translation: in an instant, Naraka and Vishnu reached Pragjyotishpura, which is one of the early names of Kamrupa, which is located at the center of Kamrupa. So Pragjyotishpura is primarily a city within Kamrupa, and where Kamakhya is a ruling goddess. That very country was earlier kept hidden from view by Shiva for his own sake. This is from the Kalika Puranam. Now, with the arrival of Shaktaism, and possibly also challenging the primacy of Shaiva worship in the region, what happened eventually was the fusion of the two traditions. And what we find in the subsequent literary cultures, both Sanskrit as well as in the vernacular literature, is a long-standing and a vibrant culture of Shaiva Shakti literary culture, kind of a composite culture that emerges during the middle centuries of the second millennium. So, second millennium AD is something that Pollock refers to as the vernacular millennium. Now, in the case of the Kamarupa kings, I talked about the Varman dynasty, and two more dynasties came up after Varman, the Salastambha and the Pala dynasties. They ruled from the 7th to 12th. Now, allegiance to Shiva was mixed with that of Kameshwar Mahagauri, thereby reflective of a strong and vibrant mother goddess cult prevailing in the region. Now, I had many instances from the inscriptions where we see a kind of a composite devotion to both Kameshwar and Mahagauri, but for paucity of time I couldn't quote from those inscriptions. But it actually provides a very interesting study in the way in which the religious and political motives of the kings were made evident in those inscriptions. So this could be an independent study, maybe a subject for another paper in the future. So within this context, this present paper undertakes to analyze the Siva Purana by the Ahom king Rudra Singha, who ruled from 1696 to 1714. Now, with the fall of the Pala dynasty around the early quarter of the 12th century, the reign of the Kamarupa kings came to an end. Now, what followed was the rise of many new kingdoms and chiefdoms within the political geography of the Assam Kamarupa, including the emergence of the Kamata kingdom on the western part of the region. Now, here, this is something that I thank Manishji for actually raising the question in the morning. That, see, when we talk about the Ahom dynasty, it says the Ahom dynasty did not rule over the entire Assam. The Ahoms came from the eastern part. So, they extended their rule gradually towards the west, whereas around the same time, around the western part of Assam, there emerged another kingdom called the Komata kingdom, which was followed by the Koch kingdom. So, from the eastern frontier, the Ahoms, who belonged to the Shan tribe of Upper Burma, entered Assam in 1228 and established an empire in the style of a monarchical oligarchy, which survived for about 600 years till about 1826. And subsequently gave its name to the region. Now, as noted by Diganta Kumar Horma, he says the Ahoms practiced Mahayana form of Buddhism combined with elements of animism, Hinayana Buddhism, and worshipped a number of gods and goddesses, usually with making sacrifices. So, the contention is that the Ahoms, when they first came into Assam, and when they ruled for the first 300 to 400 years, they did not practice Hinduism. They brought their own religion, they brought their own gods and goddesses, and those who regularly Somdev is the god whom they prayed, and his temple could be seen very prominently within the royal palace. So it's sometime from the late 16th, early 17th century that the Ahom kings gradually showed interest towards Hinduism, not Hinduism as a whole, but maybe either to Vaishnavism or to Shaivism. It's only around 1640, 1637 to be particular, when the Ahom kings formally accepted like the sectarian Hinduism, either initially they adopted Vaishnavism, they were initiated into Vaishnavism, but subsequently some of the kings also shifted their allegiance to Shaktaism, and obviously there were political motives behind that. Now this is a map of Assam. So here you can see the Ahoms actually occupied the. This is of a later time. They're from the eastern and the central part of Assam, whereas the western part was mainly the Koch kingdom. This is where. So the border was more or less present day Guwahati. So the Guwahati was more the border of the Ahom kingdom, the westernmost border. So, however, the mid 17th century, as I already said, it marked the acceptance of Hinduism by the Ahom kings. I'm shifting this slide. Now, Rudra Singha, please next slide. Now, Rudra Singha, as I already mentioned, he was the Ahom king and he ruled from 1696 to 1714. He is the author of the Siva Purana, however, could sense the danger of favoring one religious sect with the expense of another, and therefore extended his royal patronage to Shaktaism, Shaivism, Vaishnavism alike as part of his ruling strategy. So he was welcoming towards votaries, welcoming towards priests and Kshatradhikars from all different sectarian positions which were there at that point of time in Assam. But at the same time, he was also mindful towards the pan-Indian currents of religious and cultural practices as practiced by the Mughal and Rajput rulers, and sought to replicate them within his court. So he is one of the first Ahom kings who actually had a vision to emulate cultures from the Mughal court. 5 minutes. So I'll quickly go to the text. Okay, so seen from this perspective, the Siva Purana, composed by Rudra Singha, was an acknowledgement or an indication on the part of the king, not only of the millennium-long history of royal patronage accorded to the recognition and dissemination of Saiva, devotional order from Assam. If we start mapping from Bhaskar Burman, almost 1,000 years, but also of his attempt to connect the region with the pan-Indian expressive cultures, both tangible and intangible. I'm referring. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, so alongside Siva Purana, we also come across another important Purana called Padma Purana. This is Padma Purana. This is basically Manasa Purana, which came about in the early part or later part of the 17th century. In the first, and it, some scholars also date it to have been composed in the first half of the 7th. We're not exactly sure about the date. It was composed sometime during the 17th century, and it's centered on the figure of the snake goddess Manasa, who was popular across the religious cultural geographies of Assam and Bengal. Now, in this regard, both Padma Purana and Siva Purana could be seen as a a vernacular response towards the Sanskrit cosmopolitan culture which was developing around that period of time in the other parts of the country. Now, I missed giving an information that the Siva Purana in Assamese, it's not a literal translation or a retelling of the Sanskrit equivalent. The Assamese work instead is a Purana, which is there in 8 cantos. It's preceded by a Sanskrit sloka, and it has a total of 351 verses. Now, the logic behind Rudra Singha's division of the Siva Purana into 8 cantos could possibly be based on the philosophy of Ashtamurti, which refers to the 8 cosmic bodies of Shiva. Now, it is mentioned in, here I am just drawing a quick comparison with the Sanskrit Siva Purana. It's in the Bidveshwara Samhita of the Sanskrit Siva Purana, that corresponding to the 8 cosmic bodies, that is Shiti, Apas, Anal, Vayu, Akasha, Surya, Soma, and Yajamana, these manifestations of Shiva, namely Sarva, Bhava, Rudra, Ugra, Bhima, Ishwara, Mahadeva, Pashupati, are worshipped. Now, this we get similar references to these Ashtamurtis in Rudra Singha's Siva Purana, which refers to this cosmic manifestation like Yoga, Dakshina, Varuni, Kubera, Patala. Now, I'm not very sure, because there is no other literature which actually expostulates on what could have been, the exact philosophy behind, this kind of a vernacular transposition. But, since this text has not much exegesis has been done with this particular text, so it's really difficult to say at this outset. So, what was Rudra Singha's exact philosophy? What was his orientation towards, this Ashtamurti, or towards his views on Shaivism in general? So, what I am presenting in what I am trying to present is how he has tried. Since I don't have much time, I'll try to summarize my points. So, what Rudra Singha was trying to do in the Siva Purana was to create an interface between the Sanskritic culture and Shiva, as he emerged as a folk, within the folk cult of the region. Here I had referred to one, Now, in the 4th canto, which discusses the Sanat Kumar's devotion towards Shiva, his meditation, and the eventual receipt of a boon from the god. Now, considering the particular emphasis of the exalted description of Shiva suffused with Puranic metaphors, the parallel representation of him within the oral performative tradition, which shows him as a Jyotiya Bhangara, there is this passage I will read before I conclude. Jyotiya Bhangara, a god with matted locks and under the influence of hemp. A couplet within, I am taking this couplet not from Rudra Puran but from the folk culture, which describes Shiva in this way. Bhokyon Bhangor Gura Nam Tripurari, Jogotoke Diye Dan Apuni Bhikhari. You consume particles of hemp, and yet you are known as Tripurari. You bestow riches on the whole world, and yet you are a mendicant by yourself. Now, what Rudra Singha is trying to do is he's trying to combine these 2 visions of Shiva into his textual narrative structure of the Siva Purana. So, going to Siva Purana, one could actually get a sense of how he is trying to create, as I said, an interface zone between these 2 visualizations. And he's also trying to, and one thing that was important to note around this point of time is that from the 16th century onwards, what happened in Assam was the emergence of a movement called the Neo-Vaishnavite movement. Where we have been the mention of Shankardev, and what happened within Neo-Vaishnavism was a production of a mass corpus of vernacular literature in Assamese, which actually appealed to the people at large. Now, something similar did not happen in the case of Shaktaism or Shaivism. They primarily stayed at the level of Sanskrit compositions, right? So, what Rudra Singha's attempt could be vis-a-vis the composition of Rudra Puran is trying to initiate Shiva into this paradigm of bhakti within Assam. Bhakti as in like not bhakti within a temple or a court, but bhakti as a quotidian culture. I'm here using a term which was popularized by Christian Lee Nowitzki as part of the quotidian culture. Because he says, I'll be concluding, I'll be ending with this. He says, yes, he. I had a lot of things to say, but because of the time that, basically he says that whoever reads this Purana will be blessed with riches, will be blessed with a long life. This is something that we see happening primarily in the case of, the renditions of the Bhagavata Puran. But he tried to, impose that same structure within the world of the, within the Shaivite world of the Siva Puran here. So I would have also liked to talk about the musical and the performative aspect of Siva Puran, which could actually shed light on the way this text was localized within the, the musical and performative format of Assam. But obviously, because of the lack of time, I couldn't. But I hope I've been able to make my point. So, okay, here I conclude. So thank you, sir, for this opportunity, and thank you, everyone, for your patient listening. And I would love to respond to your queries and your clarifications. Thank you.